So there's a particular kind of identity crisis that can happen when you start the unmasking process. And before we go any further, I just want to say, when I'm talking about unmasking, you may hear this term more in the autistic community, and you may hear this term in the ADHD community as ADHD camouflaging. For intents and purposes of this video and podcast episodes going forward, I'm going to be using unmasking and camouflaging almost interchangeably, because for me, unmasking is just that. It's when you finally get the language for what you've been doing. So let's get into it. So unmasking includes the adapting, the performing, the monitoring, the adjusting, the figuring out what the situation requires, and becoming very good at providing it. And then someone asks, okay, so what do you want? And that's when your brain goes completely blank, which is fucking fantastic. Very helpful. Because when you have spent decades becoming what situations required, just be yourself is a surprisingly unhelpful instruction. Which self? The one at work, the one with family, the one who can host the event, the one who says, I love being busy, the one who's easygoing, the one who can handle anything, the one who learned how to make everyone else comfortable, the one who genuinely likes some things and has no idea which ones. That is one of the more disorienting parts of unmasking. It's not always, I finally discovered the real me hiding underneath everything. Sometimes it is, okay, apparently I've been adapting for 30 plus fucking years, and now I have several follow-up questions. And one of the biggest is, what do I actually want? Not what am I good at? Not what makes sense, not what people expect from me, not what version of me receives the most approval. What do I prefer and what feels like mine? So today I want to talk about why that question can get surprisingly complicated after years of masking, why confusion does not mean that you have no identity, and how to start noticing preferences without turning self-discovery into another performance assignment. Because respectfully, we do not need to optimize unmasking too. So maybe you know this feeling. Someone asks, where do you want to eat? And instead of checking your own preferences, you immediately start scanning. What will everyone else eat? What's convenient? Who's picky? What's nearby? What will be the easiest? And then, I'm good with anything. Maybe that shit is true. But maybe you have said, I'm good with anything so many times that you are no longer sure what anything includes. Or you buy clothes and you realize that you're choosing what makes sense for the version of you that you think you are supposed to be. Is it professional enough? Flattering enough? Age appropriate? Feminine enough? Useful? Versatile? Normal? And somewhere in the fitting room there's a quieter question. Do I even like this? Because maybe you are so incredibly good at a role that you're not so sure that you chose. The dependable one, the organized one, the social one, the caretaker, the high achiever, the person who hosts, the person who fixes things, the person who knows what everybody else needs. And because you're so damn good at that, people just assume that is so you. And maybe you assume it too. But being good at something and wanting to keep being that person are not the same fucking thing. And that distinction can get really uncomfortable. Because competence is convincing. If I'm excellent at this role, surely it must belong to me. And maybe, or maybe you practiced it for 20 years. Those are not the same thing. So autistic masking and or ADHD camouflaging are often talked about as hiding the obvious traits that make you neurodivergent. So it's forcing the eye contact, suppressing your stimulants, rehearsing conversations, copying social behaviors, managing your facial expressions, and boy, do I still have a hard time with that one. Try not to look too overwhelmed. And yes, those things can absolutely be part of it, but adaptation can reach much further into identity. So you learn what gets rewarded, what gets corrected, what gets laughed at, what seems too strange to other people, what creates belonging, what creates friction, and what makes you easier to understand. And humans are remarkably good at learning from that, especially because society places such a huge price on belonging. And especially when you don't even know that you're masking. You may not think, I'm just constructing a socially acceptable version of myself. You think, this is how I'm supposed to be. And it may also come across as, this is what good daughters do. This is what good mothers do. This is how competent adults function. This is what successful women want. This is how friendship works. This is what people my age wear. This is what I should enjoy. And eventually the line between I like this and I learned that this is the socially acceptable, correct thing to like can become really fucking difficult to see. Not impossible, but blurry. So I think it helps then to separate three things: preference, performance, and expectation. So preference is, what do I like and what feels better to me? What would I choose if the stakes were low and nobody needed an explanation? It can be incredibly fucking mundane. So I prefer the corner seat, or I would rather text than call. I like the same breakfast every day. I hate networking events. I would rather wear the soft pants. I like traveling. I really don't like hosting. I want some more alone time. I think I want to be around people. I genuinely like structure. I genuinely hate structure. Preferences do not have to be this profound thing, and you don't need to discover your soul's purpose while selecting a restaurant. Sometimes you're just rebuilding self-knowledge through extremely unremarkable choices, and that counts. Performance is, what am I doing because I know how to be this person here? And maybe you have a version of yourself who becomes more enthusiastic, more social, more agreeable, more polished, more emotionally contained, less needy, less intense, less visibly confused. And maybe you can perform confidence while internally trying to remember the correct place to put your hands. And the interesting part is that performance is not always fake, and that matters too. You may genuinely contain those qualities. So the social version of you may still be you. The competent version of you is still you. The caretaker may still reflect values that you genuinely hold. The question is whether you have access to choice. Can you stop performing a role? Can you be quieter, needier, less efficient, less polished? Can you dislike something that people associate with you? Can the role change? If not, we may be looking at something more rigid than personality. An expectation sounds like, this is what I should want. This is what someone like me does. This is what a good mother should enjoy. This is what success looks like. This is what my family values. This is what women are supposed to care about. This is what adulthood looks like. This is what I worked so hard to build, so obviously I should still want it. And expectations can be fucking powerful because they often arrive disguised as facts. So you may not realize that you're following a rule. It just feels like reality. Then one day you stop and think, wait, who made that rule? Do I actually believe that shit, or was I trained to believe it? And that is where the identity work gets pretty interesting. So there's a reason that just be yourself can feel almost insulting when you don't know what that means yet. It assumes that there's a fully formed, clearly labeled, authentic self sitting underneath the mask waiting to check in. Maybe there is, but often identity after years of adaptation looks more like reconstruction, rediscovery, experimentation, grief, trying things, changing your mind, and finding out that something you thought was so deeply you was partly a coping strategy, or finding out that something that you dismissed as weird is actually a preference that you still have. Realizing that you genuinely enjoy some roles you originally entered through expectation, and nothing about that process requires a dramatic reveal. You don't pull away years of social conditioning and find your untouched factory settings. You are a person who has lived a life. Your experiences have shaped you. Your relationships have shaped you. Culture has shaped you. Your neurodivergence has sure as fuck shaped you. And adaptation has shaped you. The point is not removing every influence until you become some perfectly pure self. That sounds fucking exhausting and pretty unrealistic. The point is becoming more able to tell when you are choosing and when you are automatically complying with the role. I also want to say this very clearly. Masking is not always something that you can or should simply stop doing everywhere. Context and situations matter. Safety matters. Workplace matters because bias exists, discrimination exists. And some environments are going to punish those differences more than others. There may be situations where masking is strategic. There may be relationships where you do not feel safe enough to show everything. There may be things you genuinely choose to adapt because social cooperation matters. So the goal is not always, from now on, I will behave identically in every room. Nobody fucking does that because human beings are contextual. You probably speak differently to your best friend than to your dentist. That's not an identity crisis. The question is whether adapting to context has become so automatic that your own preferences disappear from consideration. Can you notice what you want even when you decide not to choose it? That distinction matters too. Because sometimes the most important beginning is not changing the behavior. It's noticing, if nobody else had an opinion, I would actually prefer something different. And that is useful information. So unmasking can also bring up some grief because you may realize that you built parts of your life around preferences that were not entirely yours. Maybe you followed a career because you were good at it. Maybe you kept traditions because everyone expected you to. Maybe you maintained friendships built around a version of you that no longer fits. And maybe you spent years forcing yourself into environments you thought everyone secretly hated too. And then you find out, no, some people generally do enjoy this. Rude. And there can be grief in realizing how often you've overridden yourself without knowing that was what you were doing. So I don't think we need to rush that grief into, well, at least now you know. Yes, and it can still hurt. So you can appreciate the clarity and be pissed off that you did not have it earlier. Both things can be true and exist at the same time. So instead of asking, who am I really, which is a very large question to drop on yourself while you're trying to buy groceries, try asking, what feels more like me here? Or, what would I prefer if nobody else had an opinion? Because those questions create a small amount of space between preference and expectation. Notice, it does not say you have to choose the preference. You may decide that somebody else's needs matter more in that moment. You may still compromise. You may still choose the practical option. And you may keep doing something because it still serves you, and that's fine. Because now your preference exists, and that matters too. You can't build self-trust around information that you never let yourself notice. So this week, choose one low-risk situation, and I want to emphasize low risk. So we're not quitting jobs, ending relationships, relocating across the country, or getting a face tattoo in the name of identity exploration. I'm thinking more along the lines of, what do you want for dinner? What do you want to wear? Where do you want to sit? How do you want to spend 2 free hours and not feel guilty about it at the end? What music do you really want on? Do you actually want to attend the optional thing just because you have the time for it? Which mug are you reaching for? What would make the room more comfortable for you? Something where the consequences are small enough that you can actually hear yourself. And then ask, what would I prefer if nobody else had an opinion? And then pay attention to what happens next. Maybe the answer comes immediately. And maybe you hear, I don't know. That's okay. Do not turn I don't know into another sign of failure, because you probably haven't practiced the question much. Instead, try some options. Would I rather stay home or go out? Do I want quiet or background noise? Do I want to wear this shirt or that one? Plan ahead, decide later. Then notice your reaction, because your body is probably going to tell you before you have the exact words for it. It could be relief, resistance, curiosity, interest, big fat fucking no, maybe. There's something here worth noticing. And then ask yourself, what part of my current choice is preference? What part is performance? And what part is expectation? Do not expect these to fall into perfect categories because this is not a standardized test. Some choices will be all three because you can generally prefer something and also be rewarded for it. You can perform a role and still enjoy parts of it. You can follow an expectation because you consciously agree with it. Again, the goal is not purity. The goal is awareness. And if you generally don't know what you want, experiment. Because I think we put too much pressure on preference to arrive at a sudden, profound certainty. So maybe you don't know whether you like traveling because your experience of travel has always involved coordinating 6 people and remembering everybody else's medication. Maybe you don't know whether you enjoy parties because you spent every party monitoring whether everyone else is comfortable. Maybe you don't know whether you like cooking because for 20 years cooking meant, what can I make that everybody else will eat? So try things differently. Maybe you're not rediscovering an answer. Maybe you're creating new data. Try the quieter restaurant. Wear the weird earrings. Say no to the thing that you thought you were supposed to love and see whether you miss it or not. Do the hobby badly. Take the class. Leave early if you can. Stay longer if you can. Change your mind. Identity can be built through experimentation. You don't have to know exactly who you are before you start noticing what feels like you. So I think one of the hardest things about long-term masking is that it can make adaptation feel like identity. So if you've spent enough years being what situations required, it makes sense that what do I actually want might not have a clean answer immediately. That's not evidence that there's nothing underneath it. It may just mean that you're finally asking a question that used to have very little room. And maybe the answer does not arrive as, this is the authentic me. Maybe it starts with, I prefer this. I really don't like that. I want more of this. I want less of that. I thought I loved this shit, but maybe I just loved being good at it. I thought I hated this, but maybe I hated how I had to do it. I want to try. I changed my mind. Those are identity statements too. Tiny ones. Very useful ones. So pick that one low-risk situation this week and ask, what would I prefer if nobody else had an opinion? You don't even have to act on the answer. Just let yourself hear it, because that is where we start the work. Over this week on Substack, I'm also going in deeper into what happens when confidence gets mistaken for identity, how roles can become sticky when they earn belonging, and why rediscovering yourself may look less like a dramatic revelation and more like a long series of small experiments where, yes, you are going to fail at some of those experiments. And this is also a week where I want to talk a little more directly about the Phoenix Rising Collective. Because recognizing I don't know what I want anymore is one thing. Actually experimenting with different choices, revisiting old roles, noticing what fits now, and having somewhere to come back while your identity is changing is the deeper work. And that is part of what the collective exists for. Not to tell you who you are, not to hand you an answer key for your life because one size does not fit all, but it's to give you a place where you can keep noticing, questioning, experimenting, and building from what is actually true for you now. If you want to see what it looks like, just let me know. Either way, your practice this week is the same. One low-risk decision, one question. What would I prefer if nobody else had an opinion? Start there, and I'll talk to you next week.